Madam President.
Senator from, what?
Madam,
Yeah, Senator from Texas.
Madam President, it is unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with. I gather there is no quorum call, so I'll withhold that request. Thank you. Madam President, today, I should say these days, the United States is breaking all kinds of records and all the wrong kinds. In 2021, illegal border crossings hit a new high with more than 2 million border encounters along our southern border, 1,200 miles of which is the U.S.-Texas border with Mexico. Other numbers, the worst inflation in the last 40 years, 7.5%, meaning that your paycheck is worth 7.5% less than it was before this inflation rocket took off. And then a number of major cities are experiencing their deadliest year as the murder rates have spiked. The combination of inflation, open borders, and rising crime rates is a dangerous combination. Drug overdose deaths reached a grim new milestone as well. For the first time on record, more than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses during a 12-month period. That's 100,000 families that lost their children, parents, siblings, and loved ones to an entirely preventable cause. Our country's been fighting the scourge of the opioid epidemic for years now. In 2018, we celebrated incremental progress as overdose deaths dropped 4% from the previous year, the first decrease in 3 decades. Unfortunately, that trend did not last. Overdose deaths increased in 2019, and they absolutely skyrocketed in 2020. We're still waiting for complete data for 2021, but it's not looking good. The isolation, the anxiety, the financial stresses of the pandemic have taken their toll on virtually every American. But our most vulnerable friends and neighbors are the ones who've been hit particularly hard. On top of the physical and financial struggles of the pandemic, many individuals are battling substance use disorders and lost access to treatment centers and outreach facilities. There's never been a more important time for us to examine our response to the opioid epidemic and to take decisive action to stem the tide. Last week, the Commission on Combating Synthetic Opioid Trafficking released its report, which analyzed the state of the synthetic opioid crisis and offered recommendations. The Commission referred to illicit synthetic opioids as, and I quote, a slow-motion weapon of mass destruction in pill form, close quote. Now that may sound a little dramatic until you consider how much death and destruction this crisis has created. Since the Center for Disease Control began collecting overdose data in 1999, more than 1 million Americans have died from drug overdoses. If you combine the number of servicemen who died in battles throughout our country's history, the number of overdose deaths would still be higher. We all know there's no silver bullet when it comes to addressing this crisis, but it's not a matter of diverting illicit drugs or stopping overprescription or breaking the cycle of addiction. It's all of the above. But one of the most important places to start is by addressing the flow of illegal drugs across our border. Reducing the supply of drugs that eventually reach our streets is critical. As we've discussed, the crisis at the border that's been going on in its current form for a year now, I've talked about the cascading impact of the migration surge. Customs and Border Protection deserves a lot of credit for their good work But the agency plays a major role also, not just in migration or intercepting illegal immigration, but also a major role in stopping illicit drugs. But when thousands of migrants flood our borders each and every day, their anti-drug mission stumbles. Because frankly, the cartels know that if they flood the zone with so many migrants that the Border Patrol has to manage those, it leaves open avenues, veritable avenues and expressways across the border into the United States to bring in illegal drugs. If Border Patrol is changing diapers and passing out meals, as they've done throughout this humanitarian crisis, they can't be on the front lines combating illegal drug smuggling. They can't interdict dangerous drugs or deter the cartels from moving their poison across our borders. One of the most effective ways to avoid overdose deaths is to prevent those drugs from entering the country in the first place. And Customs and Border Protection is literally on the front lines of that fight. In recent years, Customs and Border Protection has seen an alarming amount of drugs coming across our border, one of the most concerning of which is fentanyl. Fentanyl is a uniquely dangerous drug because it is so potent, it's so strong. Depending on a person's body size, 2 milligrams can be lethal. A kilogram of fentanyl, 2.2 pounds, could kill 500,000 people. 2.2 pounds of fentanyl could kill 500,000 people. A few years ago, CBP seized about 2,800 pounds of fentanyl in a year. The next year, it jumped to 4,800 pounds, and the following year, Customs and Border Protection seized more than 11,200 pounds of fentanyl, enough to wipe out the entire U.S. population many times over. That's how potent it is. Once it reaches the United States, this synthetic opioid, fentanyl, often makes its way into other substances, such as a combination with methamphetamine and heroin, which too can also lead to deadly consequences. Cities across America are experiencing waves of overdose deaths caused by counterfeit opioids laced with fentanyl. In Texas, authorities recently seized more than 100,000 counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl, a haul with a street value of more than $1 million. Mexico, our neighbor to the south, is the principal source of illicit fentanyl. And unfortunately, the Biden administration has made it incredibly easy for the drug cartels to ply their trade. Now, that it is true that many of the precursors to make that fentanyl come from places like China, but ultimately, it ends up ending in Mexico and making its way into the United States. As the border crisis has grown to unprecedented proportions, it's become easier for fentanyl, heroin, and other illicit drugs to cross the border and reach communities throughout our country. There is a beyond urgent need for the administration to address the border crisis, not just to stem illegal immigration, not just to stop criminals from preying on our country by mixing among economic migrants and making their way into the country. It's also about stopping the trade in illegal drugs that are literally killing men, women, and children in communities all across our country. Until action is taken to alleviate the humanitarian crisis and get the Border Patrol back on the front lines, we're not going to make a lot of progress. We have to stop the drug cartels and criminal organizations in their tracks, and we can't do that if law enforcement officers are on diaper duty. We need a comprehensive approach to address this crisis and address additional support for those who are already struggling with addiction. Last year, the Senate passed a bipartisan bill that I introduced with Senator Whitehouse, the senator from Rhode Island, called the Residential Substance Abuse and Disorder Treatment Act, in order to help incarcerated individuals break the cycle of addiction and transition safely and productively back into society. This legislation updates the residential substance abuse treatment program and expands access to treatment in jails and prisons across the country. The program already provides incarcerated individuals with access to treatment for substance use disorders. That treatment is coupled with programs to prepare them for reentry and provide community-based treatment once they are released. The changes included in this current legislation will give incarcerated men and women the best possible shot at living healthier and more productive lives once they are released. I'm sure it's no surprise that this bill has strong support, both here in the Senate and among outside organizations that do a lot of good work in this area. More than 24 organizations have endorsed this bill, including those in law enforcement, criminal justice, and behavioral health. The bill passed the Senate with unanimous support last year, but it's still lingering on the House calendar. It's unclear when or if Speaker Pelosi and House Democrats will allow this bill to pass so we can invest crucial resources in the fight against drug abuse. There are a number of challenges that we face that transcend politics here in Congress and inside the Beltway, and this definitely is one of them. Fighting the opioid epidemic is a cause everyone in this chamber should get behind because each of our states, and indeed the entire country, has been impacted. Families across my state and the rest of the 49 states have lost children, parents, siblings, and friends to the opioid epidemic. In 2020 alone, we lost more than 4,000 of my fellow Texans to drug overdose. Unless we take action to thwart the slow-motion weapon of mass destruction, our communities will face even more suffering and more deaths. I'm tired of the pain and suffering the opioid epidemic has inflicted on families across the country. I'm angry, I'm fed up, and I believe we need a call to action, because there's an urgent need to address drug addiction in America. I'm committed to being part of the solution, and I would hope every member of Congress in the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats alike, would join us in becoming part of the solution. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I'd note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.